This is your need to know. This is your need to know.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, sometimes I wonder if people think we pick our deep dives based on how weird the topic is.
Like, hey, what's the most mind-bending thing we can explore today?
Right. But really, you sent in Julian Jaynes' The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, and how could we resist diving into that?
Oh, yeah, it's a classic.
We're talking about ancient civilizations hearing voices,
The evolution of language.
the very essence of what it means to be well-less.
And you know what's really fascinating? Jaynes argues that what we call consciousness isn't simply breathing and responding to stimuli.
That's just being alive.
Right,
So
exactly.
there's got to be more to it.
He says true consciousness hinges on introspection.
Our ability to reflect on our own thoughts and experiences.
Exactly.
Okay, so a dog might learn to salivate at the sound of a bell,
Right,
but it's not pondering the nature of that learning like we would.
exactly.
So are we saying dogs aren't conscious?
Well,
I need a minute to process this.
it's a big question.
What does that even mean for us?
Well, Jaynes proposes that consciousness is a sort of mind space we create, largely through language.
Okay.
Think of it like this. If I ask you to picture a city,
Uh-huh.
do you instantly visualize every street, building, and person?
Definitely not.
Right.
Maybe a specific landmark pops into my head.
Yeah,
Or that one intersection I always get lost at.
exactly. You're excerpting a piece to represent the whole,
Okay.
like grabbing a single frame from a movie.
I like that.
Jaynes argues that we do this constantly to construct our understanding of the world, even our sense of self.
Interesting.
You don't relive your entire life every time you think me, right?
Definitely not.
No, you're pulling out key moment experiences to form this idea of who you are.
Whoa. So myself is like a highlight reel.
In a way, yeah,
Okay, now my mind is officially blown.
it's a powerful concept.
But how does this connect back to those ancient civilizations hearing voices?
That's where Jaynes' most radical idea comes in. The bicameral mind.
Okay.
Imagine a brain with two chambers. One side issues commands,
Oh.
almost like lines of code in a computer program.
Right.
The other side receives them not as internal thoughts, but as external voices.
Wow.
The voices of gods.
So it's like their own brain was talking to them,
Right.
but they thought it was a deity giving them orders?
Exactly.
That explains a lot about those ancient texts where heroes are constantly taking direction from gods.
Like the Iliad.
It wasn't poetic license, it was their reality.
Precisely. When Agamemnon decides to attack Troy, he's not weighing the pros and cons.
He's just doing what he's told.
He's compelled by what he believes is the god's voice.
Interesting.
In fact, the words used in those texts, phryns or thumos,
Right.
they point to this early understanding of mental processes, often experienced as something coming from outside oneself.
So it's not just the Iliad.
No.
This bicameral mind was a widespread phenomenon.
Jaynes argues that it dominated early human societies.
Wow.
He even points to the Linear B tablets.
Oh, those ancient records.
Yes. They depict a highly structured world where people followed orders from above.
Likely perceived as divine commands.
It's a world where individual will, the kind of inner debate we take for granted,
Right.
hadn't fully developed.
But we obviously don't live like that anymore.
Right.
Something happened, right?
Exactly.
This bicameral mind didn't last
It
forever.
broke down.
What caused it to break down?
Well, imagine you're living in a world where the gods always provide the answers.
Okay.
Then suddenly things get chaotic.
Uh-oh.
Societies become more complex. Writing is invented.
Makes sense.
Massive upheavals like the eruption of Thera.
Modern-day Santorini.
Yeah, shake things up.
Wow. So much change.
Suddenly the old ways of getting instructions aren't so reliable.
So faced with all this uncertainty, humans had to start thinking for themselves.
That's Jaynes' argument.
I could see how that would push them to develop new ways of making decisions.
It was a huge turning point.
But how did that lead to the kind of conscious introspection we have today?
That, my friend, is where language, and especially metaphor, steps onto the stage.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Jaynes believes language played a key role in constructing consciousness.
Tell me more.
Think about it.
Uh.
When you say you see a solution,
Yeah.
are you literally using your eyes?
No, it's more like I understand it.
Right.
I've grasped the concept.
Exactly. That's metaphor in action.
Cool.
You're taking a concrete experience site and using it to represent an abstract idea understanding.
I see.
This ability to manipulate concepts through language to create that mind space.
Yeah.
That's central to Jaynes' theory.
Okay. I'm starting to see how all the pieces fit together.
It's a complex puzzle.
The breakdown of the bicameral mind, the rise of language and metaphor, and ultimately the emergence of consciousness as we know it.
Precisely.
But I have to ask,
Go ahead.
if this bicameral mind was so dominant,
Yeah.
are there any remnants of it left in us today?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the most intriguing aspects of Jaynes' work.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
He sees echoes of the bicameral mind in phenomena like schizophrenia, hypnosis, and religious experiences.
Whoa.
But we'll dive into those fascinating topics in the next part of our deep dive.
This is definitely one of those deep dives where you need to buckle up and hold on tight.
It's a wild ride.
We've covered a lot of ground already, and we're just getting started.
We're just scratching the surface.
Stick with us, because things are about to get even more mind-bending.
Oh yeah, get ready.
All right, we're back and ready to dive even deeper into Julian Jaynes's The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. I don't know about you, but my head is spinning a bit after all that.
It's a lot to take in, for sure.
We've gone from ancient gods speaking in people's heads to schizophrenia, hypnosis,
Even religious experiences.
all potentially tied back to this idea of the bicameral mind.
It's a pretty radical concept.
Before the break, we were talking about how those early humans experienced their own thoughts as the voices of gods. And we left off with a question. Are there any echoes of this ancient way of thinking left in the world today?
There are, and this is where Jaynes' theory gets really thought-provoking.
Oh, tell me more.
He sees remnants of the bicameral mind in a range of phenomena,
We touched on a few.
from schizophrenia and hypnosis to religious experiences.
Right.
But before we get into that,
I'll bet.
let's take a step back and think about what the transition from bicamerality to consciousness meant for how humans experience things like free will.
Okay, that's huge.
It's a fundamental shift.
If bicameral people were just following commands, how did they perceive choice?
That's a key question.
Did they even have a concept of free will?
That's what Jaynes grapples with.
Yeah.
He argues that for a bicameral person, volition wasn't this separate internal process. It was the voice of the god,
Oh, interesting.
an external command.
So they didn't even think about it.
To hear was to obey, with
Well,
no sense of inner debate or deliberation.
so their actions were determined by those voices.
In a sense, yes.
But it didn't feel like a lack of choice to them.
Exactly.
Oh.
It was simply the way things were.
Okay.
The concept of an individual self making choices independent of the gods
Right.
that hadn't fully formed yet.
And so Jaynes sees this reflected in the evolution of language itself.
That's right.
It's all connected.
Think about words like mind, soul, self.
Yeah.
They emerge as language becomes more complex.
So we're literally talking ourselves into being self-aware.
That's the idea.
That's wild.
Yeah,
It reinforces how crucial language is to Jaynes' whole theory.
absolutely.
Language is everything.
He argues that as language became more nuanced, it gave us the tools to create that mind space
Right.
where we can reflect on our own experiences.
I see.
It's like we build a stage inside our heads where we can play out different scenarios, consider multiple perspectives,
Okay.
all thanks to language.
Which brings us back to metaphor.
The superstar of Jaynes' theory.
Right. It's not just a poetic flourish.
No,
It's fundamental to how we construct consciousness.
precisely.
It's like how we think.
Jaynes argues that consciousness itself is a kind of grand metaphor, a way of making sense of our experiences through language.
It's like our brains are constantly weaving stories, creating narratives
Yeah.
to explain what's happening both around us and within us.
And those stories, those metaphors,
Right.
shape everything from our perceptions and beliefs to the actions we take.
It's powerful stuff.
This is your need to know. This is your need to know. This is your need to know. This is your need to know.
But this whole process isn't just happening on a metaphorical level.
Okay, there's more.
Jaynes also dives into the neurological side of things,
Okay.
exploring how our brains change during this transition.
Right, we talked a bit about the left and right hemispheres of the brain earlier.
Yeah.
Remind me, what roles did they play in all of this?
Think of it this way.
Okay.
The left hemisphere is often associated with language, logic, analytical thinking.
Okay, the more logical side.
Right.
I see.
The right hemisphere is more about emotions, intuition, special awareness.
Okay, the more creative side.
You could say that. Jaynes suggests that in the bicameral mind, the right hemisphere was the source of those godlike voices. Then as consciousness emerged, the left hemisphere with its language abilities started to take on a more dominant role.
So it wasn't a complete takeover, right?
No.
It's more like a shift in the balance of power
Exactly.
between those two ways of experiencing the world.
A kind of negotiation.
I see.
And Jaynes proposes that this negotiation between hemispheres is still ongoing.
So it's still happening today.
That's his idea.
We're not perfectly rational beings driven solely by logic,
Right.
our emotions, intuition. That right hemisphere influence
Yes,
still shapes how we think and act.
absolutely.
Okay, so that brings us back to those echoes of the bicameral mind.
Right.
You mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
how does schizophrenia fit into this picture?
Well, some researchers believe that schizophrenia might represent a kind of tilt in that balance, where the individual experiences those right hemisphere voices as intrusive and uncontrollable. Imagine if those ancient god voices never faded away,
Oh, wow.
but instead became jumbled and confusing.
So it's not about being possessed or inherently flawed,
Right.
but potentially a different way of experiencing the world,
Exactly.
one that was once the norm for everyone.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is, and this understanding can help us move away from stigma and toward more compassionate and effective treatment approaches.
That's the hope.
But schizophrenia isn't the only phenomena Jaynes links to the bicameral mind.
Right.
He also sees a connection with hypnosis.
Yeah, interesting connection.
Okay, how does hypnosis tie into all of this?
It seems pretty different from schizophrenia.
Yeah,
On the surface, yes.
okay,
But think about what happens during hypnosis.
okay.
You enter a heightened state of suggestibility,
Right.
becoming more receptive to commands and suggestions.
Like the bicameral mind.
Jaynes saw this as a temporary shift back towards a bicameral state,
I see.
where the hypnotist's voice takes on that authoritative godlike role.
So it's like we can tap into that ancient way of thinking,
For a little while.
at least for a little while through hypnosis.
Exactly.
And what about religious experiences?
No. Yeah.
Where do they fit in?
Many religious figures describe hearing the voice of God or experiencing divine visions.
Yeah, it's a common theme.
Jaynes argued that these experiences could also be understood as vestiges of the bicameral mind,
Interesting.
instead of interpreting those internal sensations as their own thoughts and feelings.
Okay.
Individuals attribute them to an external divine being.
Like an outside force.
It's fascinating to think that these different experiences,
Right.
schizophrenia, hypnosis, religious visions,
All connected.
could all be connected to this ancient way of thinking.
It's like we're carrying a piece of our evolutionary past within us.
Exactly.
And Jaynes's work encourages us to explore those hidden depths of the human mind.
To question our assumptions about consciousness.
Yeah, and to consider the possibility that we're still evolving.
Both individually and as a species.
It's like he's opened up a whole new frontier of understanding
A vast landscape of the mind.
that we're just beginning to explore.
And he leaves us with some profound questions.
Like what?
What does it mean to be conscious? Is it a fixed state or an ongoing process?
Good question.
Where is consciousness heading next?
And perhaps the most important question,
Yes.
what does all this mean for us here and now?
How can we use this knowledge to better understand ourselves, our relationships, and our place in the world?
That's a lot to think about.
But that's the beauty of the deep dive.
We're not just skimming the surface.
No, we're plunging into the depths of these complex ideas.
And even though we've covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
we've only just scratched the surface of Jaynes' work.
There's so much more to explore, so many implications to unpack.
Exactly.
And we encourage you to continue this journey of discovery on your own.
Pick up a copy of The Origin of Consciousness. Dive into the research and see where it takes you. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into Julian Jaynes, the origin of consciousness in the breakdown of the bicameral mind.
You know, it's funny.
My head is still spinning a bit after all that.
I know, right? It's a lot.
We've gone from ancient gods speaking in people's heads to schizophrenia hypnosis, even religious experiences.
And it's all potentially tied back to this idea of the bicameral mind.
It's just wild.
It's a radical idea for sure.
But even if you don't buy into every detail,
Right.
Jaynes raises these incredibly thought-provoking questions about consciousness,
Absolutely.
about language.
How the human mind evolved.
Like he's given us a whole new framework for thinking about ourselves.
It's a different way of looking at things.
Absolutely, whether you agree with his conclusions or not.
Right.
Jaynes' work forces us to confront assumptions we often take for granted.
It makes you question things.
Like we think of consciousness as this given,
This fundamental part of being human.
and Jaynes challenges that.
Yeah, suggesting it's a cultural construct that emerged at a specific point in history.
And it's still evolving.
Still changes.
That's what I find so mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's a big idea.
If consciousness isn't this fixed thing, where is it going?
What does the future hold?
Jaynes himself speculated about the possibilities, right?
He believed that as technology advances and our understanding of the brain deepens, we might develop entirely new forms of consciousness.
Wow.
Imagine experiencing the world in ways we can't even conceive of right now.
It's both exhilarating and a little terrifying to think about.
I know, right? It's like mind-blowing.
We're not just talking about incremental changes here,
No, this is huge.
but potentially a whole new era of human evolution.
It's like we're standing on the edge of a vast unknown.
And that raises some profound ethical and philosophical questions.
Yeah, definitely.
If we have the ability to alter our consciousness, should we?
It's a big question.
What are the potential benefits and the risks we need to consider?
We need to think carefully about this.
These aren't just abstract questions for the distant future.
No, they're becoming increasingly relevant.
As we grapple with advances in artificial intelligence and brain-computer interfaces,
It's all happening so fast.
it's like we're writing a new chapter in the story of consciousness.
And we have a responsibility to write it thoughtfully and carefully.
But as daunting as it might seem, it's also an incredibly exciting time to be alive.
It really is. There's so much potential.
Jaynes' work has given us a map for navigating this uncharted territory.
A way of approaching these complex questions with curiosity and open minds.
And that's what we try to do here on The Deep Dive.
We like to explore.
It's not just about presenting information.
No,
It's about encouraging you to think critically,
to question your assumptions.
to engage with these big ideas that shape our understanding of the world.
And ourselves.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Julian Jaynes' The Origin of Consciousness,
A fascinating book.
we want to leave you with a challenge.
Okay, I like a challenge.
Don't just take our word for it.
No.
Explore these ideas further.
Dive in.
Dive into the research and come to your own conclusions.
Form your own opinions.
Pick up a copy of Jaynes' book. Explore the criticisms.
See what resonates with you.
And most importantly, keep asking those big questions.
Those are the ones that matter.
What does it mean to be conscious?
Yeah. What does it all mean?
What is the nature of the self?
And where is consciousness heading in this rapidly changing world?
Because the more we understand about consciousness,
The more we understand about what it means to be human.
and who knows, maybe somewhere down the line,
Yeah,
you'll be sending us your own deep dive on the future of consciousness.
I'd love to see that.
Until then, keep diving deep, keep questioning, and keep exploring.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
This is your need to know.